Hi, I'm Joseph Lubin. I grew up in Toronto. I currently live in New York City. I work at a company called Consensus. My father's a dentist, and my mother did various things, real estate. She was a top tennis player, and she was #1 in Canada under 40, and grew up playing tennis, so she did that extensively. She did mortgage brokerage, and she was a mom. My dad enjoyed his work, was pretty passionate about it, and I never wanted to be a dentist. I was much more interested in technology pretty early on. High school was pretty cool. I had some good friends who were sort of in between the really cool kids and the really nerdy kids. So smart, but kind of fun as well. And did lots of sports. Played squash, played tennis, skied. I didn't have extreme expectations from my parents. I think my dad expected me to be honest and a decent person. My mom didn't foist too many expectations on me. I think it was expected that I would go to college, but it wasn't never really an issue. There wasn't a ton of pressure. I guess pressure to, or a little bit of pressure to do well, but that was kind of diffuse. I loved it. It was a gorgeous place. I was on the squash team, so heavily engaged in that sport, and a lot of great people, a lot of really cool, really smart people, just an amazing environment. Okay, my grand plan upon leaving college initially was to go sweep floors on Ridley Scott's set, wherever that would be. Didn't quite do that. I ended up driving around playing squash tournaments. So played for a very short period of time on the professional squash tour. I ended up playing a tournament in Philadelphia and spending time on campus with some friends who were still at the school. Ran into a professor there who was doing research on neural networks, and I was doing a bunch of reading on neural networks at the time. The previous year, I did my senior thesis on artificial intelligence and encountered a whole lot of neural networks papers and got kind of obsessed with that field. And so he asked me what I was up to, and I told him I was just traveling around playing squash, and we started talking about neural networks for some reason, and he on the spot invited me to come and work for him, do a research program, run the robotics laboratory, train with the team, go to tournaments on weekends, and have a hybrid life like that. And so I think I played one more squash tournament after that, and just got really absorbed in the work. And I wasn't going to end up being the #1 squash player in the world anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. I don't read books. I used to read lots of books. I read email. I read blogs. I read articles all day, every day. I audiobook some things sometimes, but these days it's just way too dense. I'm just processing information that needs to get taken care of. Some science fiction, cyberpunk, I guess some classics. Neil Stephenson is my favorite science fiction author. Neil Stephenson wrote Snow Crash, which was a sort of roadmap for how some things have evolved in terms of cyberspace. So he's just, I enjoyed his sense of humor, and I enjoyed his vision of the future. So after being a technologist, and my last stint as a technologist was running a software project at Goldman Sachs, I slid into the world where I was still a technologist, because I'm always a technologist, but ended up building trading systems, running a hedge fund with a partner. Did that for a little while, and then got excited about doing vertical farming. So I did a bunch of research on aquaponic systems, marrying hydroponics with aquaculture and creating recirculating systems. So did a lot of work putting a business plan together on that. Decided that I would go live in different sections of Brooklyn for a little while to try to figure out where I wanted to build this project. I ended up spending time with a friend, and we ended up moving to Jamaica together because she wanted to. I was free to do roughly what I wanted to do, and she always wanted to be a musical artist. So she was already an entertainer, and she was a songwriter and singer, and so it sounded fun to work a little bit in the music industry, and she knew everybody in Jamaica in the music industry, so we could get things done at extremely high quality and inexpensively, and so we went and did that. And so when all this stuff hit, I was living in Jamaica. I just remember that so for a long time I read Slashdot, and I think there were some things that I vaguely paid attention to about Bitcoin before I actually paid attention to Bitcoin. And so early 2011, I read something on Slashdot and downloaded the paper and jumped in right after that. So I've been a technologist for a long time and transitioned to the world of finance. And when I started to understand things, I got depressed about how broken some systems were, how financially and morally corrupt various systems were. And I came to the conclusion, maybe 2004, that we were on a slow cascading collapse, and it was going to be very difficult to find a growth engine that would enable the world to grow its way out of a collapse. So it felt like there would either be a slow collapse or some sort of nasty, nonlinear, fast collapse. And people were, after 9/11, people were waking up and exploring the systems around them, exploring the context in which they were embedded, waking up to things like monetary theory and geopolitical systems. I guess there were lots of people who were trying to share what they'd learned. I was doing a little bit of the same, and as you're aware, people were occupying lots of different systems, including Wall Street, and so that was about just kind of getting the word out, helping the social context to understand that things were broken, and I was a little depressed about it because I didn't see a good way out. But when I read Satoshi's white paper, it did dawn on me virtually instantly that decentralized systems could be a way of building better infrastructure. And so it pretty rapidly changed my attitude. The fact that you wouldn't need central authority to run different systems, the fact that you could build a money system that's of the people, by the people, and for the people was pretty profound. It wasn't clear to me how to apply that very broadly. I had some inkling that you could build a whole society on that technology, so I was already thinking very vaguely in that direction when I read Vitalik's white paper describing a scalable mechanism for getting that done, and I don't mean scalable in terms of transactional throughput per second. I mean scalable in terms of how a reasonable number of developers could each identify their own problems and build their own solutions on a general purpose virtual machine that sits at every node of a peer-to-peer network. So that was an instant revelation. After I talked to him, I was pretty certain that this was going to be profound, and I read his white paper that night and decided to stay very close to the project, and it evolved over a small number of weeks, and we all got together in a house in Miami in advance of the North American Bitcoin Conference and really formed the project there in earnest, and he delivered the paper at that conference. It was a very big room, standing room only, probably 4 or 5 people deep at the back and at the sides. So it was pretty highly anticipated. And there was a huge crowd around him after the talk, probably answered questions for 45 minutes. So centralized control of monetary authority, money creation, can be perfectly viable in lots of situations for pretty long periods of time, but when you have debt-based money, you are creating new money, and that money needs to be paid back at some point. But that money also requires interest to be paid back. The interest is never actually created anywhere, so you always have to keep creating new money so that the original money plus the interest is enabled to be paid back into this initial debt creation event. And so that can go along for a very long time if interest rates are very small. The problem is that politicians are often in control of the entities that end up creating systems that create the money. Politicians are incentivized to give away too much value to their constituents so that they can get reelected. And so you get into a situation where politicians overspend and attempt to create situations where that spending is paid for, often by the creation of new money. And so if you raise the budget ceiling repeatedly, year after year after year, you get into a situation where you're creating way more money, essentially creating way more debt in the system than there is money to pay it off, because the interest rate tends to grow and spiral. So if you have fiscally responsible people running the system, you can probably keep it running forever. In history, I think money systems on average last about 70 years before they hit some sort of end of life event or situation. And so, and it may be happening now, it's probably happening now around the world as we have quantitative easing. So we've gotten to a situation where in order to pay down all the debt in the world, we have to create more and more money at increasing rates. And so there's a good chance that we are in an end of life state for various money systems in the world. The exciting thing is that we do have different technologies that can enable tremendous growth, and technologies that can enable new foundations for new kinds of systems. So we could potentially grow our way out of the current situation, like free energy or instant teleportation or something like that. So you could imagine an economy that just gets massively supercharged by technologies like that, and we create so much value that we just discharge all that old debt and we can go back to normal interest rate cycles potentially. Or you could move to a new trustful infrastructure. You could move to money that's not based on debt. The one thing that's interesting about cryptocurrency versus fiat currency is that you have a governor who's basically pushing, accelerating the growth of the money supply and contracting the growth of the money supply. And that sort of thing is based on signals captured from the world that are 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 3 years out of date. So you've got all this data coming in, and you're making decisions based on things that happened kind of a long time ago. And so if you understand how control theory works, if you work if you react to data that is stale, you can tend to overreact, or you react in the wrong direction, and you create these cycles. So you create these oscillations that are much bigger than they should be, and so you can get into these situations where things can spiral out of control. If you have real-time systems, like we built Balance, a real-time accounting system, a general ledger system. So if you can move to a world in which you're getting real-time data and using that real-time data to modulate the money supply, you could get into a situation where you have these tight feedback loops, and you wouldn't really have oscillations, massive oscillations in interest rates and money supply. So a token is a construct based in a field called cryptography. In practical usage, can represent money like a cryptocurrency. It can represent a share. It can represent a resource like a kilowatt hour. It can represent admission to an event. So Beyonce tickets could be a token. So currently, the original token is a protocol token, cryptocurrency. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a money application used for remittance, used as a store of value. The entire Bitcoin protocol exists in the service of that value token. A different kind of token, Ether, is also a protocol token. It's a crypto commodity, kind of a crypto energy, a crypto commodity, a crypto asset. It exists in the service of the Ethereum platform. The Ethereum platform is a platform for decentralized applications, and because it's a permissionless world computer, people can upload infinite loops, or they can upload their entire video collection, abusing people's shared resources effectively. And so in order to make it acceptable to do whatever you want on this permissionless system, you have to pay a tiny slice of Ether for every computational step and storage operation on the platform. In that sort of context, you can do roughly whatever you want, and it's not really perceived as spam. If you've got the Ether to pay for something, then nobody should really judge what your usage is all about. Other tokens can represent things like kilowatt hours. We built a decentralized electricity generation, storage, and transmission infrastructure. We've got smart batteries attached to devices, smart devices that can put out bids on a network and buy kilowatt hours when they're topped up. If the price is right, they can put out offers onto the network and sell some of their energy, just time shifting usage. Yeah, so I like calling token generation events token launches. So that's my preferred terminology. We try to distinguish between a token launch, which is a launch of a utility token or a protocol token that would not be deemed by the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States to be a security. And sometimes I'm happy to use ICO, initial coin offering, as a description of a tokenized security, or basically the launching of a token that would be deemed by the SEC to be a security. That distinction is that the SEC, when it does evaluate what a token is, looks at many different things. It doesn't just look at the structure of the token. You could have something that looks like a perfect utility token that the SEC would not consider a security. But if you start talking about it in terms of investment, return on investment, ICO, which sounds a lot like IPO, and paint the impression that this is an investable asset for the purchaser, and that they're going to profit by the agency of others, that language itself could be sufficient to cause the SEC to believe that what could be a utility token is actually being seen as a security. A protocol token, I like to think of as a token that drives the function of a protocol. So something like Ether that is necessary for a base level system to operate, I would call that a protocol token. Utility tokens are often, at least by me, used to indicate that there's a higher level protocol, basically something like a protocol-driven open platform on Ethereum. So our Ujo music platform could be an example of that, where the token is also intrinsic to the functionality of the system. The Gnosis platform is another really good example of that. So Gnosis would be a utility token. If you're going to sell a tokenized security, as we did with the Braid film, that's yet another class of token. And further classes would include admission to events and tokenized resources like kilowatt hours.
Awesome. Really well on this. Did it feel like gambling?
No, not at all. It didn't feel much different from other ways of making money. I'd already run a hedge fund before, so I'd already built trading systems, so it wasn't a very new experience to me. I think there are lots of ways of making money in our ecosystem. There are long-term holders who have made money, will probably continue to make money. There are, I guess, hedge funds that are popping up. Some entities are making money in the short term by buying tokens speculatively and trading around them. Some people are building software and selling software. So at Consensus, we make money by security auditing software. We make some money running Infura, an infrastructure element to the ecosystem that currently, as of November 2017, processes about 1.5 billion requests per day on average in the public ecosystem. We make money on enterprise and government consulting. We'll probably soon make money on the academy. You can't call it revenue, but we do token launches of our own projects that enables us to either do pre-sales of a token or sell a token that can be used in a protocol. We do token launch services for third-party companies and make money that way. Yeah, I think the dot-com boom and the blockchain boom are very comparable. The dot-com boom had a massive period of speculation. and a bubble, but it did sort of result in this little thing called the internet, which has changed absolutely everything we do. So in both ecosystems, you have speculation. You can't avoid speculation. Speculation is a good and necessary thing in economies. Speculators are in a position to take on risk in order to have the possibility of certain reward, and so they provide liquidity to markets, and they provide the fuel for innovation often. And so blockchain technology is a profound technology that is, because it will enable us to build all the things that we want to build on a more trustworthy, more equitable foundation. It will affect virtually every information technology system on the planet over time. And that's a value proposition that people pay attention to, and some of those people get wind of it early on and pay a lot of attention to it early on. So you get people who are excited about it, putting money into it, and you get into these fear and greed cycles. So often, perfect price discovery is not a thing, and so you tend to oscillate. You go a little too far, and then a mini greed cycle hits, and you drop down probably below fair market value for shares or tokens. And so I think in the blockchain ecosystem, we're going to see a series of higher highs and higher lows, and we're just getting started. So I think many of these value tokens are going to go to the moon, as people in the industry like to say, because the impact of the technology is so profound that they will just be used really widely. The value is determined by supply and demand, and there's going to be a shocking amount of demand for these things. The interesting thing about these tokens, or tokenization, is that you can take all of the elements, the foundational elements that we rely on in our society, things like money and identity and reputation and agreements. You get trust for free from the blockchain on which those agreements run. Things like government certificates, all of those things are realized in analog form these days. Even if there's a digital representation of money, it's still, the notion of money is analog still. And in all those technologies, there are frictions and delays in every transaction that involves those technologies. When you move those things into native digital format on registries, on blockchain systems, and we're already doing that with money in the form of Ether and Bitcoin, we're doing that with identity in the form of Uport. As everything becomes natively digital, any transaction involving those foundational elements becomes friction-free. It has clearing and settlement compacted into the instant of the transaction. And so upon those things we care about sitting in registries, we can build layers and layers of software functionality that also operate roughly at the speed of light, friction-free. And so the point here is that if you move these transactions closer to one another in time, all these value creation events happen more and more quickly, fewer delays between them. You get a similar phenomenon to exponential compounding of interest, where you're creating much more value exponentially per unit of time in your economy. And that's going to change everything quite profoundly, and some speculators are aware of that phenomenon. So the blockchain space was formed as a reaction to existing systems. So Bitcoin was created as a decentralized money protocol in opposition to centralized money protocols. And by doing that, and perhaps any good revolution starts that way, and if it's a scientific revolution or a social revolution, if it's a good idea, first it is counterculture, but then as people start to understand it better and better, and if it does imply better ways of doing things, it becomes the norm. And so I think we are moving reasonably rapidly towards transforming the world from top-down command and control based centralized systems to much more equitable decentralized infrastructure. So I may have started with a crypto anarchist or two, but I think it's going to go mainstream, and it's going to be not at all counterculture, just better culture. So it's some people trying to make money, or it's a lot of people trying to make money. Money represents sustainability of our bodies and our companies. But I think our space is filled by a lot of people who want to build better systems. The vision for our company Consensus is to enable the world to build better systems for itself, and Consensus hopes to be part of building a bunch of those better systems.